Hey everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel. And today I want to talk about Nintendo, the Switch era, and whether or not the Switch era of Nintendo might actually be their greatest era of all time. So right now, we're about halfway through the year of 2022. This, of course, is the 6th year of the Nintendo Switch's life. There's a lot of talk and conversation and theories and speculation about whether or not Nintendo's next console or next generation leap in hardware might be around the corner within the next year to 2 or so years. Obviously, I've been one of the people spearheading that conversation for a long time. Over 2 years myself, I've been talking about it happening around 2023. And there are a lot of people starting to jump on board with that thinking. And so, given the time frame that we're in right now for the Switch era of Nintendo and the kind of, end of the 8th generation, the beginning of the 9th generation that we're also sitting in when it comes from Sony and Microsoft and just where the industry is, I'm starting to get a little bit reflective on really what Nintendo's been doing in the Switch era and how things have been compared to prior generations for Nintendo and for the gaming industry. It's very interesting. I'm learning a lot about how I feel about what Nintendo's been doing in the Switch era. Most of the things that I really like and think are fantastic, some of the things I think they might have been missing out on. And that's kind of what sparked this conversation in me today, where again, we're going to kind of discuss whether or not this could be viewed as Nintendo's strongest generation of all time. Now, for what it's worth, most of you who follow me and follow the channel already know this about me, but if you stumble across my channel through this video, it is worth noting that I like to consider myself fairly qualified to really discuss this simply because of my age, right? So, I'm 41. I'm about to be 42 next month, which means that I've been playing on Nintendo's hardware since the very beginning when the NES came out in the United States in 1985 or 1986. I'm mostly sure it was 1985. So I was 5 years old when my older brother came home with a Nintendo. So ever since then, I've been gaming and I've been playing on every Nintendo console since. I definitely know what every generation looks like for Nintendo. And so when I look at what Nintendo's been doing in the Switch era, man, it's really hard to deny how well things have gone for them. And they deserve major credit because it's also a huge turnaround from where they were last generation with the Wii U. Now, another thing longtime viewers will know about me is the fact that I love the Wii U. I still play my Wii U to this day. In fact, I was playing it just this week. I think it's a great console. I loved the gamepad when it was used correctly. And I really think that the gaming industry and the average gamer and even Nintendo fan really missed out by not picking up and supporting that console, because I think it could have been much more successful if people kind of bought into it early on. Now, Nintendo clearly made some mistakes with the marketing. There's no doubt about that. Their messaging was confusing. That made it a hard concept for people to get into in the beginning, and they could never overcome that like they did with the initial launch of the 3DS, for example. It is a shame, and I think that ultimately everyone missed out, and everyone interpreted the Wii U incorrectly, and unfortunately made it a failure. But what that does mean is when we compare the Wii U generation to what Nintendo has done with the Switch generation, it's night and day difference. And they do deserve credit for, from a business sense, making just the most unbelievable rebound, maybe the best rebound we've ever seen in the gaming industry. Now, the Switch is definitely not my favorite Nintendo console. It's actually far from my favorite, and part of that is because I'm an older guy with a lot of nostalgia for the consoles and the eras of gaming that I grew up with. I will always consider the 90s era of gaming the best, and that's across the board. Nintendo, Sega, the introduction of Sony, and many of you know I'm a big Atari fan, and I'm a big fan of the Atari Jaguar, which is notoriously an unpopular console, but I love it. I own a Jaguar and a Jaguar CD, and I play that every once in a while too. So that whole era had a bunch of really bad stuff, but a bunch of great stuff, and I just love that era. So it's hard for me to not look at consoles like the Nintendo 64 and the Super Nintendo and the original PlayStation, the Jaguar, the Game Boy, all of these things. It's hard for me to not look at those as my favorite consoles and my favorite eras. But if I were to look at the Switch era and the Switch as a piece of hardware objectively, even though I do love it objectively, I can also look at it and say, man, this might be And I mean, I really think this is where I fall. This might be Nintendo's best and strongest era ever in their long history as a gaming company. I think that there's three areas of Nintendo's business that you can kind of look at and analyze to determine how successful and how strong it is. One is obviously the sales. That's first and foremost. Are they selling well? Are they making money? Are they successful from a business perspective? The second is the games output, the quality of the games, the amount of games, the success of the games, all of that stuff. And then the third would be the overall success of the brand. And I've brought this up in a couple of videos over the last few weeks because it's been an idea that started to become very apparent to me that on top of the strong sales and the good games, it's also a matter of kind of looking at the brand of Nintendo and the fact that the average person sees it as a strong name and a strong company. And when people think of gaming, they think of Nintendo. And when people think of Nintendo, they think of, that's a great company and I like to buy their products. And currently, I think it's indisputable to say that Nintendo is firing on all cylinders in all three of those categories. Sales, I mean, you can't combat that. Even if you hate Nintendo or hate the Switch, one thing that cannot be denied is their incredible sales. The system is now over 110, 114 million units. It's in its 6th year of life. It's definitely going to be around for another couple of years. Even when they release their next generation console, they're going to support the Switch for several years into the life of that next console. So this thing will not be going away anytime soon. It has a chance of getting in the range of 140 to 150 million units sold, maybe even becoming the best-selling piece of hardware of all time. I mean, you know, they've surpassed the Nintendo Wii, which was previously their best-selling home console. It's just insane what this thing is doing from a sales perspective. So from the business end, yeah, it's definitely their best generation from a home console perspective they've ever had. Now, of course, the game's output is one of the most important and most fun elements to talk about because at this point, I mean, what do you say? They've basically touched every single franchise in their catalog, or at least most of the franchise, and of the ones that they've touched, it's been some of their biggest and most important. And beyond that, of every franchise they've touched, they've made, in many cases, one of the best entries in that respective franchise, or even, to some people, the best entry in the respective franchise. It's unbelievable. They've made one of, if not the best Zelda game, one of, if not the best Mario game, one of, if not the best Metroid game, one of, if not the best Kirby game, Hyrule Warriors, Super Smash Bros., Luigi's Mansion, new IPs like Astral Chain. They've made Mario sports games, and I know that there's debates on the quality of those, but they've made a new Mario Tennis, a new Mario Golf. They are about to release a brand new Mario Strikers. They've made a new Paper Mario. They've made a new Fire Emblem. They've made a new Splatoon. They're about to release a new Splatoon. They're about to release a new Bayonetta. I mean, the list could go on and on. And you have to respect and admire what they've done from a library perspective. You know, as somebody who always touts the Wii U as a fantastic console based on the strength of its library, it's hard to deny the strength of the Switch's library, man. I mean, it's really impressive, and I'm so appreciative of the fact that they've been able to do what they did. And they came out of the gate with an incredible launch year. They knew that that was something they needed to do. Oh, gosh. I mean, they launched a new Xenoblade, and they're about to launch even another Xenoblade. You know, they've also, we can't deny the incredible third-party support from third-party multi-platform games like Doom and Mortal Kombat to exclusive games, again, like a Bayonetta or a Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 or what have you. I mean, they've done almost everything you need to do. Could they be getting better third-party support than they've gotten in the Switch era? Yes. But has it still been very good and solid? Absolutely. Maybe the best it's ever been since the Super Nintendo and the GameCube era. And when you combine that with their incredible first-party lineup and all the franchises they've managed to touch in the Switch era, on top of the insane sales for these games, obviously, of course, Animal Crossing is another one. I just keep remembering franchises as I go here, right? Tons of Pokemon games, and all of these games are selling very well. Metroid Dread, the best-selling Metroid game of all time, has now released in the Switch era. All the third-party support, I mean, the sales, like I said, I'm just repeating bullet points here. Again, it's weird because the Switch isn't even my favorite console, but again, I'm analyzing it and discussing it from an objective lens. And that's where these bullet points keep spilling out of my brain, because it's just unfathomable and unreal and very cool to see what Nintendo has achieved in the Switch era. And again, it is compounded by the fact that this was built as a response to the unsuccessful Wii U era. How can you deny the fact that this might be Nintendo's best generation of all time? Of course, the fun and interesting thing will be to see what happens after the Switch generation, which, we can kind of wrap this short conversation up here. Like I said earlier, a lot of us are beginning to suspect that the next generation machine, whether it's another hybrid Switch or whether it's some other weird kooky thing, if it's called Switch 2 or Switch Pro or Super Switch or whatever it is, once they go into a next generation leap in power, Switch or not, what will happen then? How will Nintendo follow up the Switch era? They followed up their least successful era with their most successful era. Again, referring to their transition from Wii U to Switch. So now they're going to have to transition from their most successful era into whatever the future turns out to be. Will they become more successful? Will they become less successful? Will they plateau and stay the same? Will they have a complete failure and another train wreck on their hands, at least in terms of sales, of course, I'm talking, by the way. It could go in any direction, and it'll be really interesting to see what Nintendo thinks is the proper way to follow up the Switch. My perspective and my guess is to stick with the hybrid model for at least one more generation, make the Switch hybrid concept their go forward for now, maybe even forever, although it's hard for me to think it will be forever. Nintendo likes to change things up and innovate, but the level of success they've seen with the Switch, how could they not do it? You could even argue they did it when they went from the DS to the 3DS. They kept the same model, they just improved and innovated on that, and they remained extremely successful. So why wouldn't they find a way to continue the hybrid Switch model, but make a couple of evolutions and tweaks to that to make it something unique and different while also making it more powerful, thus continuing that concept and hopefully seeing something that's around as successful as the Switch has been. Personally, that's what I think they're going to do, but we'll never know until they tell us. I'm really thinking we're going to see and hopefully play that next piece of machinery next year in 2023. And so, I don't know. Only time will tell. So, of course, I want to know what you guys think. Do you see the Switch as Nintendo's best era of all time? Also, how does that match up with your favorite era of all time? Because again, my favorite era of Nintendo is SNES, N64, and GameCube. To me, that will always be, those three generations will always be my personal favorites for Nintendo. But again, if I remove my favorite and look at it objectively, that's where I look at the Switch as probably their best era. Obviously, then probably followed by like the Wii and the Super Nintendo eras, right? So how do you break down the Switch era? How do you compare it to your personal favorite? And all of the above, talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video. Bye-bye.